All right, Ross, absolute pleasure to see you. How have you been, my friend?
Been a busy time, Vinnie. I've just come back from lying on a beach and I'm feeling a lot better. Tanned, rested, and feeling dangerous.
Good to hear. Really good to hear. I appreciate you joining me. And yeah, it has been. It's been a crazy since we last spoke. Lots been happening. And before before we get into the interview, I put out that I was speaking to you so people can put in questions. And can you guess what the most requested question was?
Um, where's the hidden UFO?
My goodness, people just won't let that go.
Well, it's funny. I almost regret talking about it, to be honest, because one of the problems you have as a journalist is when sources tell you things, you are obliged to respect, if you like, the confidences in which they're imparted. And I know this sounds old fashioned, but there's kind of like there are the catastrophists and the destructors on the UAP fringe who basically think, oh, dang it, just say whatever you've got, let it out there and hang it out there. And I'm not one of those people. I'm a journalist. And to give you a good example, I once got leaked details of the deployment of Australia's SAS to the western desert of Iraq. And I knew in advance that our special forces were being dropped into the western desert of Iraq in um, the period when we were about to take back, or, if you like, supposedly liberate Iraq from Saddam Hussein. What a misery of a war that ended up being. But I was in touch with a member of one of those units, and they told me they were going in. And it was very clearly understood that I was being given a heads up purely and simply that I knew that they were doing what they were doing, not that I could run it as a journalist. And in this case, there are very, very good reasons, very sound reasons that I accept for national security reasons shouldn't be imparted. And people can squawk as much as they like. I really don't care. I mean, I think people need to understand that if this subject is to be taken seriously, we have to apply the rigor and the objectivity and the standards that we use in traditional journalism, which is that we don't put people's lives at risk, we don't jeopardize sources, and we certainly don't imperil men and women, young men and women, who are doing honourable and decent things for their country.
Yeah, I think we have one shot at this, and it's got to be done the right way. So I completely understand. Absolutely. Well, listen. Obviously, the Jake Barber story is kind of the big thing that you broke recently, and there's been questions surrounding it because it really is such a big, quite crazy sounding story. So I wonder if you could talk me through the kind of 2 year investigation and the rigor that you put into vetting Jake and the other guys that came forward as well.
I can tell you that when I first met Jake Barber, I thought he was what some people are suggesting I've seen on social media, some kind of CIA plant. I thought this was some kind of psyop that was designed to lead me off on some kind of wild goose chase. And look, frankly, uh, without going into too much detail, I've more than satisfied myself that Jake and his team have taken extraordinary risks to bring this story to the public arena. And they're more than a little bemused and frankly frustrated that there are dimwits out there in the community who take it upon themselves to essentially suggest that these people are doing this for less than honourable motives. Um, Simple fact is, Jake is the one person who's put himself to the test. He said, if you don't believe it, wait and see. We're going to prove it. And I've seen it. I mean, I've seen the summoning operation happen. I've seen a psionic attract the phenomenon. I know it can happen. I don't know how they do it. I don't know how the human brain is capable of such things. But I've more than satisfied myself that an operation took place where perhaps there was correlation, not necessarily causation. I think what we'd like to see is something that can definitively, in some way, prove that there was a causal connection between the psychic summoning, if you like, that we've all witnessed taking place and the arrival of what seems to be some kind of intelligently controlled object. And look, I mean, I'll tell you, I'm a hardened skeptic along with the rest of them. And the first time I ever heard about this, I thought to myself, oh, this is a lot of baloney. This is nonsense. And then I started talking to people. I started checking out the bona fides of Jake Barber. And There's a lot of Jake Barber's history that I can't reveal. He's basically connected into a group of people who are the very elite of America's military. And by definition, a lot of the work that they do is secret. But I've more than satisfied myself that he worked in a role for an intelligence agency, and that more importantly, he was selected to be part of that intelligence agency as part of a feed program from the Tier 1 selection program that he was on at the time, where he was essentially in a program that was training him up as a Tier 1 operator. He was diverted out of that program and found himself in an intelligence agency where he operated under non-official cover. And I'll be the first to admit that I've dealt with people in the intelligence community before, especially people who are essentially NOCs. And I think it might amuse people to know that there are actually people working in the UAP media community who are NOCs for the intelligence community. This is actually a very common thing. But Jake Barber made it, by the very nature of his work, extremely difficult to prove the veracity of what he did and does. Suffice to say, there's a lot of background information that's been provided to me that more than satisfies me that he was working for a particular intelligence agency until very recently, and that he was also working as a subcontractor for a private aerospace company at a particular facility that he calls the Range. And it's a measure of the guy that he's done a very measured disclosure. It's not done with any official imprimatur. He's not being allowed to do this as some kind of controlled disclosure. What he's done is he's basically sought permission to tell a story, and they've told him what he can and can't talk about. And in the course of that, he's not allowed to reveal the intelligence agency that he's worked for, and he's not allowed to reveal the location where he operated, and he's not allowed to reveal the name of the aerospace company. And that's something that I respect. I happen to know the name of the aerospace company that he worked for, and I'm very aware of the operations that he conducted for them. And that's been part of my proving process, is actually verifying independently what he tells me. And one of the things about journalism is the story is almost 1% of the story. There's 99% of the story in the background where you're doing the checking. I think the best measure of Jake Barber's veracity is that he's already given 4.5 hours of testimony to the Senate Select Committee for Intelligence, and I've spoken to people who were in the room with him, and they've told me rather, that they've regarded him as a person of high veracity, and they believe his story, and more importantly, they've been able to check his bona fides as well. Moreover, if there was any doubt whatsoever, if there was a hole that the Defence Department or the intelligence community could pick in the story of Jake Barber, don't you think they would have leaked it to one of the more tame, supplicant little toadies on the social media spectrum by now, so that they could try and denigrate him? All they've done is basically attempt to have a go at him for being incredibly open and honest about the emotional experience of his encounter with what he believes was the phenomena. And I think people should be sitting back and taking note of the fact that here you've got a guy that was trained at the absolute top level of America's military. He's beyond any shadow of a doubt one of the most highly trained soldiers who developed into becoming essentially an undercover operative for an intelligence agency. These guys are meant to be made of steel, but there's an emotional fragility about him, about the phenomenon, that I find absolutely fascinating. And it's the same with his colleagues, Fred Baker and Don Paul Bales. They've all been affected by the phenomenon in different ways, but all of them say that it's been profoundly spiritual for them. And I think that's why they feel the need to come forward, because they think this is too big a secret to be kept for this long. And moreover, there's no real justification for the continued secrecy. There is probably stuff that ought properly to be kept confidential if it gives the United States some kind of military or strategic advantage against potential foreign adversaries. But at the heart of it, they passionately believe that you, the public, have the right to know that we are not alone, that the United States is fully aware and has been aware for decades of a non-human intelligence engaging with this planet. And if that sounds like cockamamie nonsense, then go away and watch the Kardashians. I don't really care. The bottom line is the government of the United States is begrudgingly being forced very slowly into an admission that this is a reality. And I think we're seeing, especially with the announcement this week of the Anna Paulina Luna task force, the Transparency Task Force, that has as one of its focuses the UAP subject. At some stage, the sluggish, dull legacy media is going to wake up to the fact that this is a story. And maybe they might start applying the resources and investigative teams to the subject matter that ought properly to be being applied to a subject like this. So, yeah, I mean, my answer is that I've done a very, very rigorous checking process with Jake Barber, probably one of the best measures of why I strongly believe his story, in addition to the other corroborative material that I've seen, is the level of caution that they had for their own safety and for mine when we were meeting with them. Basically, they were armed to the teeth. I was escorted in an armoured vehicle with machine guns and all manner of weaponry. These people weren't taking any chances, and that's because of the risks that they've been exposed to on the job. And without going into a lot of detail, for reasons that I'm sad to say I can't detail here, they've been provided to the Senate Intelligence Committee. There's been some incredibly dangerous things that have happened on domestic US soil that really do go to the heart of the issue of the ridiculously unnecessary secrecy surrounding this whole program. It's getting dangerous and it's out of control. And the President, the Congress, needs to assert their legislative and constitutional authority and do the proper thing and restore oversight to a program that essentially lost its way 60, 70 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. I'm really backing Jake and the Skywatcher team completely. I'd like to talk about the, we had News Nation reveal the egg video alongside the interview. Are you able to tell me if Jake has any, or the team, or anyone has provided you with any other sort of videos that aren't out in the public domain? Have you seen anything else?
I'm aware of other videos, yes, and I know that there is other video material, extensive video material, which I think has been offered and may indeed already have been provided to the Senate Intelligence Committee, and moreover to AARO. And this is the interesting thing: is AARO, the Pentagon's UFO investigation office, under Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, was provided with a great deal of information and intelligence by Jake Barber and or one of his colleagues in a briefing. Actually, it was one of his colleagues. And mysteriously, all of that information that was provided to AARO at that time disappeared from AARO's files. And it wasn't until Jake Barber, after his friend had given the briefing to Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, it wasn't until Jake Barber went to AARO after Kirkpatrick had left and spoke to the new director, Dr. John Kozlowski, and provided Kozlowski with the details of the information that was provided previously to AARO, that AARO itself realized that there was no longer information in its possession that had been provided to AARO previously. Someone had removed that information. No, don't know who, but bottom line is, AARO's job is to investigate UAPs. I can assure you, Dr. John Kozlowski fills me with a greater degree of confidence than his predecessor. And whilst his hands may be tied and the Defence Department might not want the rate of disclosure to be as fast as it appears to be becoming at the moment, I do get the impression that he's quite serious about investigating the phenomenon properly. And I know for a fact that he's asked to accompany the Skywatcher team when they do their next summoning.
Wow, that's encouraging.
Yeah, I mean, I do think, I think, it's funny, we all assume conspiracies before screw ups. And I mean, I've got a great saying: always assume a fuck up before a conspiracy. And it's something that you're taught in investigative journalism when you're doing the work. Is that it's very easy to look at a scenario and think that this is a bunch of evil bastards concealing something. And sure, there are a bunch of evil bastards who are concealing something here, but by and by, the reason for the concealment isn't, I don't think, I'm not persuaded that there's any great secret that's needing to be protected. Nobody, and I always ask this question, I've met multiple people now inside the legacy UAP retrieval or reverse engineering program. Military people, civilians, scientists, every single one of them, I ask them, is there any good reason why the public can't know that NHI, a non-human intelligence, is engaging with this planet, and that the US and other countries know all about it? And a couple of them have scratched their heads and tried to make arguments, but 99% of them have said to me categorically, there is no good reason for the public not to know. And ultimately, it's just easier for these stiffs in suits to keep this secret. It really is easier. There's a presumption of secrecy. And it's funny, I did a story years and years and years ago about the Australian Secret Intelligence Service, ASIS, which is our equivalent of MI6. And I interviewed a guy who was quite a senior station chief in a very well-known location. Actually, he was in India, in New Delhi. And he told me that the thing that would amuse me as a journalist, I had this impression of sort of daring do and espionage and, downloading encrypted cables back to Canberra of top secret conversations with all sorts of sources. And he said to me, look, Ros, 99% of the stuff that we put secret stamps on is pretty mundane. Most of it comes from newspapers. Most of it's open source information. Very rarely is there really good human intelligence. And frankly, the reasons for the secrecy have become almost an excuse. And I think one of the things that really strikes me about the secret world is have a look at the history of the secret world. Have a look at what happened in 9/11, where you had compartmentalized pods of secrecy all across the United States intelligence community, which meant that the CIA didn't share with Homeland Security. I don't know if it was Homeland Security, but didn't share with the FBI, or the FBI didn't share with the CIA, or the DOD didn't share what they had. And because none of these intelligence agencies were talking to each other, terrorists with ill intent came into the United States and attacked the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and every other place in 2001. And it's horrendous that happened, but it happened largely because of excessive secrecy. And what I take great heart from is that in the wake of that tragedy, they created the Director of National Intelligence, whom Tulsi Gabbard is now going to be the head of. And she's going to, and she's very avowedly determined to do so, she's going to try to investigate the UAP secrecy. And if they find failures of oversight, if they find criminal fraud, concealment, which I know they're going to find if they look, it's all going to come out. And at the moment, it's really interesting because I think the defence aerospace community can hardly believe what's going on, because they've had this cosy little secret now for years, and all they've ever needed to do is put a stiff in a suit and a uniform and walk up to people and mumble, national security, can't talk about it, but, it'd be good if you didn't take this any further. And people just meekly roll over and accept it. And, we all know the usual suspects in Congress that have done that for so long. But there is a cultural change happening here, because the American taxpayer is entitled to ask, what's happening with my money? Why can't we fix bridges in Baltimore? Why are our roads falling apart? Why are there record numbers of homeless people? Why is the health system such a disaster? And a large part of the reason is because of vast amounts of money are unaccountably going into the bottomless pit of national security expenditure. And as Elon Musk's Doge has politely asserted this week, they cannot account for trillions of dollars. And now they're being told they have to do an audit. They have to account for every single line item. That's going to be a really interesting moment because, frankly, the reason they can't is because they've been using, and we know this, we know that they've been using real programs protected under SAPs to divert huge amounts of money into an illegal, probably criminal, legacy UAP program. And that's illegal under the Constitution. You can't hide that with a presidential executive order or a presidential emergency action directive. The Constitution is the dominant legislative document, and it asserts that the Congress has to be properly informed about the expenditure of public monies, and it hasn't been. And it's that simple principle that I think is going to restore disclosure very soon, I suspect.
I hope so. And I mean, I think there are certainly different angles that it may come from. I mean, you mentioned there the new declassification task force set up by Anna Paulina Luna, but, we know that they don't have subpoena power.
Well, yeah, but they will have subpoena power if James Comer, the chairman, agrees to give it to them.
Are you confident that that'll work, though?
Oh, look, it's nowhere near what we were going to get, which was a Presidential Records Review Board, which, no thanks to Mike Turner of Ohio, we were not able to get. I mean, basically, there was intervention, blatant lobbying by the defence aerospace community and the Pentagon to stop that legislation from going through in December last year. And if it hadn't been thwarted, we would have a Presidential Records Review Board that had already begun the process of declassification of UAP files. I don't want to pour cold water on the hopes that we've got for the Transparency Task Force. They're obviously going to make the JFK files their first priority. And interestingly enough, I wouldn't be surprised at all if there was a connection between the murder, and when I say the murder, I mean the coup d'etat, the conspiracy by the state to murder JFK, and UFOs. I'm in no doubt whatsoever there were multiple shooters, and I've spent a lot of time investigating that story. I did a special about it for News Nation. And I've spent a large part of my life reading every book on JFK. And I just, for the life of me, do not understand how America has been able to tolerate for the last 60 plus years the absolute lie that President Kennedy was killed by one lone shooter, Lee Harvey Oswald. And at the heart of that conspiracy is what is the problem with the UAP issue, whether it's connected or not. It's this idea of a national security state that, because of the paranoia and the fear during the Cold War, was given ridiculous power. And, Alan Dulles, the then CIA director, was effectively sanctioned by Eisenhower to go out and murder world leaders, and including Fidel Castro and, God help us, what's his name, the guy in the Congo, Lumumba. It's a tragedy that these kind of things happened. And as has been demonstrated time and time again, most of these decisions by the secret state, by the CIA in particular, were utter follies. They were unsuccessful covert operations that were done in the name of national security that just undermined America's security. There's a great book called Mark Weiner called Legacy of Ashes that basically tells the story of every known CIA covert operation since the Second World War. And it makes the point that every single one of them was a failure. There's a great podcast at the moment. The Rest... is it The Rest is Spying? I've forgotten what it's called. But essentially, it's a couple of Brits a Brit and a Yank telling a story about, in the first episodes, the overthrow of the Shah in Iran and the causes why the CIA was essentially involved in an overthrow of the then slightly nationalist leader of Iran, which led eventually to the fall of the Shah and the beginning of extremist Islamism in Iran. And essentially it's largely because of, driven by Iranian fear and hatred of Americans' improper dealings inside Iran and meddling inside Iran. And it's that kind of secret manipulation behind the scenes that has done so much to discredit the good work done by America in much of the last 60 or 70 years. And again, we've got this rancid secret of the UAP mystery. And I actually think they're just sitting on it at the moment because they're frankly twiddling their thumbs, not knowing how to deal with it. I suspect there are grey, faceless men sitting in a bunker somewhere thinking, how the hell do we deal with this? We're going to be audited. How do we account for the hundreds of millions, if not billions, if not trillions of dollars that have been expended on the legacy retrieval program? What is the one argument that we can make that can justify to the president why he should continue to keep this secret? And is it even plausible that this will be kept secret? I don't think it is, when you have people like Jake Barber coming forward with his team. And believe me, there's a lot more where he came from.
Good to know. Good to know. I mean, we hear about a lot at the moment about the crash retrieval side of the legacy programs. We don't hear so much about the reverse engineering or attempts to reverse engineer. Have you spoken with anyone within the legacy programs that are focusing on that aspect of the subject?
Yes.
Because there's this age-old question: is some people believe we cracked anti-gravity back in the 50s after the Roswell craft, and then there are people now that say we can barely even get inside these things, let alone understand how they work. Where do you sort of lie on that scale?
I can't say definitively what I know because I don't know for sure. I do know we've had materials science failures. I don't think we've been able to replicate the hull, the construction of these craft. It's essentially manufactured at an atomic level. It's beyond our materials science ken. And frankly, I think that's one of the reasons why you're seeing this really interesting division, this divide starting to happen, where pretty big money is coming into operations like Skywatcher from Silicon Valley. And who are the best people in the world in materials science right now? Who are building the most miniaturized technologies in the world right now? Guess who? Silicon Valley. And they're pissed. They're really angry that they've discovered that this whole UAP secret has been kept from them, and that a bunch of legacy private aerospace companies, purely and simply because they were around at the time, were given the benefit of this technology that has probably amplified their share price beyond all value. I mean, there are allegations that, for example, some of this technology has been able to be developed to assist in the development of some of our more advanced aviation technology. It may very well be that we haven't been able to crack the Holy Grail, but we've certainly been able to develop technologies from it that have advanced American fighters and stealth spy planes in particular, far more than any other nation in the world. As for anti-gravity, I find it very hard to believe that the United States has not cracked anti-gravity, because I'm told that the science behind it is not all that complex, nor is the science of zero-point energy. It's a monstrous allegation to make, and I know there are people who've been making the allegation for years that the ZPE and anti-gravity have been cracked many, many years ago, possibly as early as the 60s. But I strongly suspect that the Americans or a private aerospace company know how to do basic anti-gravity. But whether that means that they can propel craft at interstellar speeds across the universe, that's another question entirely. Because then you need materials science that allows you to do what those craft purportedly do from the NHI. I just don't know. What I have spoken to is multiple people in the legacy program who are, some of them scientists, who are deeply, deeply frustrated as scientists that their good efforts to investigate this technology, which they're really excited about, is being frustrated by compartmentalized secrecy, to the extent that their lives are threatened and their families' lives are threatened. They are monitored constantly, and the techniques with which they reached out to me and contacted me were originally way beyond my understanding. I never knew it was possible to communicate in the way that they communicated with me. And it's incredibly difficult to keep in touch with them because of that, because they know they're being monitored. But the message that I get from them overwhelmingly is that they are deeply frustrated that the public is not being told, at the very least, this incredibly exciting and positive and optimistic thing that there is a non-human intelligence that is vastly more advanced than us, multiple such intelligences. They're interested in engaging with us. And basically, for much of the last 70, 80 years, we've sought to derive a military advantage by keeping it secret. And the irony is the secrecy has actually frustrated our ability to crack the science. And what's needed is an international effort, a collaborative effort, where we get all of the nations of the world collaborating to break the science, forget our differences. And I think one of the explanations, by the way, for the failure to reveal knowledge of ZPE is, and I do accept that this is a good argument to a point, there are extremist religious groups or fanatic groups, far-right groups, far-left groups, that are just crazy enough that if they knew how simple some of this technology is, you could basically obliterate things in a way that far exceeds the capability of thermonuclear weapons. It's a whole level of bad danger far beyond what we know at the moment. And I know it's easy to say that sort of stuff, and people will go, well, I want to know more, I want to know more detail. The word scalar weapons is something people should be looking up. They're purportedly fictional. They're purportedly non-existent. I would suggest people think again.
Wow. Okay. That's interesting. I mean, we're talking about whistleblowers and that, with the sort of scrapping or the failure of the NDAA last year, and there were no new whistleblower protections added, which we were hoping happen, and then Jake Barber comes forward. Does that give people behind the scenes confidence in potentially coming forward that we may see more whistleblowers, even though that extra protection isn't there?
Do you know the biggest hindrance, I think, to whistleblowers right now is the snide carping from the community of people who for years have been asking first-hand whistleblowers to come forward. I mean, if I was Jake, I wouldn't have done it. I mean, why in God's name would people come forward, risk their careers? I mean, he's walked away from a secure job that he's held for 20 years, along with his colleagues, because he passionately believes you guys have a right to know what he knows. And what has he copped? Oh, he's a CIA plant, or he's a false flag operation. And there's all these so terribly well-informed trolls on social media who just make these specious assertions without any understanding of what it involves for people like somebody like him to come forward, and the checks that have to be done behind the scenes to verify his bona fides. If I was a whistleblower, I'd be thinking, you know what, maybe we're not ready. Maybe people are just too immature to deal with the ontological shock of this reality. I mean, it's funny, I've actually had a conversation with somebody in private aerospace who rang me up out of the blue. I didn't know how they got my number, but they're from a very prominent private aerospace company. And we had a very frank conversation about disclosure. And I said, why not? Why not reveal it? And the argument that I got was people aren't ready. And I have to admit, the immaturity, the nastiness, there's been I agree, a solid rump of people who've been very supportive of Jake. But frankly, I would question if I was a whistleblower. I would question as a journalist if I was being asked, and I'm being asked by whistleblowers whether they should come forward. I would not encourage them to come forward right now, because I don't sense, even though Annapurna Luna, Representative Luna, is making all these noises about the UAP issue being focused on in her committee, let's just wait and see. Let's just see what they can achieve in 6 months. I think 6 months is ridiculously short for a start. And you're right, they should have subpoena powers. And they really should have the status of a full select committee with full subpoena powers and the power to conduct and hold full public hearings. It's crazy. If they're serious about this issue, they should be putting it on a podium and getting aggressive. And I don't see a level of aggression from the political class. It's weird. And I think part of it on the religious right is they're spooked by the implications of the spiritual ideas that are being conveyed, that essentially at the heart of this is the possibility that what religion has sought to explain for 2,000 years might in fact be simply the human brain engaging with some kind of uber consciousness that's got nothing to do with certain religious beliefs. Or maybe it's the other way. Maybe it is a religious belief and they're worried that essentially what we're doing is attracting something demonic. That's certainly the line that I get from a lot of people in the US Air Force, that essentially we shouldn't be engaging with this and we shouldn't be acknowledging its existence or making people aware of it because it's demonic. And I can tell you, I've spoken to people who genuinely believe that. And look, I can't dismiss it out of hand either, to be perfectly honest. We don't know what the intentions of the NHI are. I just know that there is an advanced intelligence that is engaging with humanity. And if you look at most world religions, at the heart of it, what is God? What are angels? What are demons? I mean, maybe they are ways of describing what people have encountered over human history and never fully understood. And maybe they are capable of evil. Certainly the impression I get, and the impression that Jake and his team have got, is that it is certainly the entities that they've been engaging with, friendly, compassionate, loving indeed. There's any number of other reasons, frankly, why at the moment, if I was really genuinely asked by a whistleblower and sat down, I'd be saying, just keep your powder dry. Let's just wait and see what these guys in Washington, D.C. show. Because I was really disappointed, for example, with the White House spokeswoman making the statement on the drones that was made, where you had the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, in December, and this is really important. It's important people understand this. As a journalist, I'm taught to look for contradictions in official policy. Okay, this is a huge one. You could drive a truck through the holes in the official line here. So the FAA says in December that these drones are not authorised. They don't know the source of them. They don't know anything about them. And, they're concerned about them. They're a national security threat and a public safety threat. That's the evidence they gave under oath to the Congress. Roll forward a month, and then the White House comes out under the new Trump administration, or it's a bit more than a month. And all of a sudden, they just make this one-sentence statement that the drones were authorised, FAA authorised research drones, and for other purposes. And this is the thing, I just felt like throwing a rock at the TV set when I saw this, because, not one journalist in the White House press corps, that lazy, supine bunch of fat, lardy asses, I don't know what the fuck they do all day, but they're sitting there and there is just the biggest story dropped in their lap. All it took was for one journo to say, hang on a moment, just come back for a moment. Your FAA said back in December that these were not authorised, that there was no knowledge at all about these objects. Are you saying that the FAA lied under oath? What's the truth here? In what way were they research drones? There was just no inquisitiveness at all, no curiosity at all. And I guess I see everything in that context because I happen to believe that at least some, if not most of those drones at different times have been NHI, especially the ones over the different Air Force bases and the British bases. And I think what's happening is that the United States is trying to explain away the presence of these NHI drones by putting up some of their own advanced technology. And that's what people have been seeing. They've been seeing two different sets of objects in the sky, orbs, and then these more craft-like drones that appear to be operating using navigation lights and things like that, but then also displaying somewhat anomalous properties. To me, the fact that there's been a complete lack of curiosity in pretty much all of the mainstream media except for Fox News and the network I work with, News Nation, to a network, nobody deployed investigative teams outside the other networks. None of the newspapers deployed any kind of investigative team to go out and investigate. All they did was get the usual tame, supplicant, skeptic debunkers to write articles saying this was all a hysterical flap, and the public were misleading themselves. Go back to your bedrooms. Nothing to see here. Move on. And frankly, I just think that's a disgrace. And if I was somebody in the legacy program right now, looking at both the political response, the media response, and more importantly, the social media response to somebody as courageous as Jake Barber and his colleagues coming forward, I would be thinking to myself, I'm just going to wait and see what happens with Anna Paulina Luna's Transparency Committee and the various Oversight and Intelligence Committee's investigations into these allegations. Because that's the other thing. The Senate Intelligence Committee, the House Armed Services Committee, the Senate Armed Services Committee, the Oversight Committee, they've all had this stuff from Jake Barber and his team and other legacy whistleblowers for months, well before we went public. Why haven't they done anything with it? And I spoke to a senator who is on the Senate Intelligence Committee, and I know that their staff were aware of the allegations that were made by Jake Barber. They were not aware of the allegations made by Jake Barber. Why? Because the staffers had elected not to pass it on. Why? Now, one of the problems I have with Washington is staffers are often serving two masters. They're serving the politician that they work for, and they're also keen to make sure they get a job in private aerospace after they leave politics, working in the Congress. And is it the case that some people have allowed themselves to be compromised by the positions that they hold? Have politicians not been fully apprised inside the Congress of what's being told to the committees? Because there's been this cosy little practice where politicians quarantine themselves from the danger of somebody like Jake Barber coming forward by deploying senior staffers, often legal counsel, to go and take their evidence in a secret skiff. And then it's up to the staff to decide what or how much of what this person's told them they pass on to their political minder. And that's the game that's played in Washington, D.C. And frankly, in that kind of a climate, if I was a whistleblower, I don't know if I'd trust these mongrels. And that's the problem. These people are, as Jake has done, being invited to take incredible risks. I mean, it's an on-the-record allegation from Jake Barber and his team that people have been murdered to protect these secrets, period. Now, I know there's an FBI team investigating. There's a covert FBI investigation underway at the moment, and I've known about it for some time. I think the story or the fact of that investigation broke very recently. But I'm heartened that we've now got a more tenacious head in the FBI on the UAP issue in the face of Nash Patel, and also that we have a DNI in Tulsi Gabbard who have avowedly expressed an intention to get to the bottom of the UAP mystery, as has John Ratcliffe over at the CIA. But how aggressive are they prepared to be? Will they, die on a rock in order to protect the public's right to know? Or are they susceptible to the same kind of conversation that has probably happened 100 times in the last 60 or 70 years, where a senior official in a uniform walks into a politician's office and says, look, we were thinking about building a new factory for our Gazoo nuclear weapons system targetings modules, and we think that part of your political electorate would be a really good place to locate it. But there's just one problem we've got at the moment, and that's this UAP thing. It's a big diversion for us. It's taking too many of our resources away at the moment, and frankly, it'd be a hell of a lot easier if we didn't have to deal with it. What do you think? Do you like the idea of a factory in your electorate? We can help you there. And that's how Washington works. Every politician is susceptible to that kind of manipulation. And I just worry about the fact that you've got fairly junior people in Representative Luna who are leading the Transparency Committee. I don't doubt her integrity and I don't doubt her zealous commitment. But why is James Comer not putting his face and name to the committee? You know, it's very much the more junior members of the UAP caucus who've basically gone public on this issue. Why are people like, for example, now Secretary of State Marco Rubio staying silent? Why hasn't President Trump, made any kind of executive order on UAPs? He could solve this mystery in a flash. Told his son he would. And this is the issue. I think we're entitled to be skeptical. We're entitled to think, look, politics works very differently in Washington, D.C. It's very transactional. What's in it for me? And so a politician's sitting there at the moment and he's thinking, wow, this is a secret that's been kept for 70, 80 years. I accept it's true, but I've got this guy in a suit in my office who's telling me that, you know, it's going to cause me all sorts of problems. You know, they're going to take this arms factory away from where I'm trying to win votes. I'll probably, you know, lose about 200 or 300 jobs in that part of my district. Wow, this is a real problem. Easier just to let it slide. Easier not to let it happen. And believe me, the lobbyists behind these big aerospace companies are incredible. And it's no coincidence that when you look at the people that have, I mean, the best analogy I can think of is, you know, the politicians who were squealing the most about the moves on the Department of Health, you know, and the actions on COVID-19. All of them are subjugants of big pharma. And I mean, it's not a conspiracy theory, it's a fact. And, you know, the fact is money politics runs Washington, D.C. And one of the most powerful lobbies in Washington, D.C. for the last 70, 80 years has been the military-industrial complex. President Eisenhower warned about it. So I think we're entitled to be skeptical. I'm hopeful, really, really hopeful. And I guess I would have liked to have seen the UAP issue at the forefront of what Representative Luna was pushing first off. But the JFK story is a really good conspiracy mystery to start off with. But I hope they don't lose their momentum. I hope they continue pushing hard, because the UAP mystery, if what we're being told is true, it's a criminal scandal that puts Watergate in the shadows.
Yeah, we do need that momentum, because we only have to look back at the struggles that they had with trying to get David Grush into a skiff and having the right clearances, you know, and they might need SAP status.
They never did.
It all sounds really good that they're going to do this and they're going to do that. But to get everyone with the right clearances, the SAP status at the right place at the right time, it isn't going to be easy based on what we've seen historically. So they can stand in front of the podium and promise all these things and say they're going to do this, but it doesn't fill me with confidence. And I'm sure there are a lot of people out there that would agree. But, you know, that leads me to think, you know, looking at what Jake Barber and the Skywatcher team are kind of planning to do, you know, could we completely bypass Congress and the government? Could Jake Barber's team actually bring us?
That's exactly what Jake wants to do. As he said to me in the interview, you know, we don't need Congress. We don't need the national security state to tell us what to do. We can do it ourselves. And I don't think people have fully realised yet what he's got. He's got millions of dollars in private equity funding from the big end of town who know the official story is bullshit. They know the public are being lied to. I mean, I went to a conference at Esalen, south of San Francisco, which was a very restricted, very high security conference attended by some very, very high net worth people and some of the top scientists on this subject from all over the world. And I was blown away by the interest from high-level Silicon Valley, people who clearly know categorically that there's a cover-up, and they think it's hilarious and amusing that the public is still allowing itself to be misled and deceived. And they're operating on the assumption that it's real and positioning themselves by investing in Skywatcher so that they can basically be there to develop what the US has kept secret quite improperly for 60, 70 years. And there's nothing stopping them from developing that technology. And I mean, that's the exciting thing, is that, you know, there's a real probability now that the materials science technology will be out in the public domain. And more importantly, what you'll see, and I've spoken to people in the legacy program who've told me they want to do this, as soon as they see a private enterprise company in a public way working on the materials science behind these objects, they're going to jump from the legacy program and come and help. They want to go and work. They might not go public, but they want to go and work for these new companies. They really want to bring the knowledge and the know-how that they've developed in the black and take it to private sector, because they think everybody's got the right to know about this. They are as frustrated as you and I about the retarded way that we're still running on fossil fuels, and that we are, planes fall out of the air, that there's technology there that they know about that can be developed to human advantage. And it could put, I've actually had very idealistic ideas from people inside the program who say, if the public knew what we knew, the world would lose its differences in a moment. We would think of ourselves as human beings. We would not think of ourselves as Russians or Chinese or Americans. The reasons for wars, energy, resources would largely disappear. The technology is mind-boggling, and it is being suppressed. And it's grossly, gravely improper that it's being suppressed. Take that as a given. But if Jake and his team follow through with what they're doing, and they're only a tip of part of what's happening with Skywatcher, what you're looking at is a transformation, a paradigm shift that could usher in a new human revolution. And it would be the kindling of an awareness of human consciousness and obviously highly advanced technologies. It could also lead to new spiritual understandings about ourselves and possibly challenge a number, if not all, of the world's religions. And I think a large part of the intransigence that we're seeing historically has come from the religious institutions, notably the Catholic Church, that knows all about the phenomenon and knows all about NHI, but has colluded in its suppression for decades.
Yeah, no, for sure. Let's talk about, we've had David Grush, historically talking about biologics and that he'd spoken with many witnesses about craft. And then recently in this trailer for the new upcoming documentary, The Age of Disclosure, we have Jay Stratton admitting that he has seen the craft and the bodies. Now, with you speaking with so many people in the legacy programs, have you had other people say that they have seen these things as well?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, I can't tell you a lot about it, but like you, I just gasped when I saw Jake. He's such a tease. He goes, craft and bodies. And boy, that's one hell of a promo. And I'm looking forward to hearing the full grab, the full sync exchange. I really hope he goes into detail. People don't realise that Jay Stratton was senior to Lou Elizondo at one stage in the UAP task force. He was read into a lot of stuff, as was Lou eventually. And he's got every reason to know what he says he knows. And notice also some of the other faces that appeared in that sting. I think James Clapper is one of them, former DNI. These are senior people. John Ratcliffe, now a CIA director. It's fascinating. It's fascinating to see these people speaking so candidly about what they're aware of. How come they can do that? I'm sure they haven't all done DOPSs. And it's really interesting because, I sense what's happening is the Age of Disclosure documentary is going to be key. It's going to be a very big moment where it might just give that shove. And the timing's great too for Dan Farrer and Lou, because, it's going to bob up pretty much at the end of, what is it? Didn't they say it was March that it's going to run? Which if you think about the timing, so they're going to be doing JFK. They've got all the evidence coming into the committee by February 18th on JFK. So let's get the JFK conspiracy out of the way by end of February, early March. Completely unrealistic, of course. What do you do next? God damn, let's get into UAPs. And perfect timing, bang, up comes the Age of Disclosure. Anybody would think that this has been organised.
Yeah, it sounds great, and we need that momentum. This really could be a year for really making that progress. I really hope so.
Well, it's funny. I was just laughing because I was hearing your British accent, and I was thinking, yeah, I wonder outside of the US, wonder which nation is the friendly nation that Anna Paulina Luna has said she's going to go and visit because it's already commenced the process of disclosure. And I'm just speculating, but I'm assuming it's either France or Japan. And that's interesting. I think we should also be looking to our own countries here in Australia, Japan, France, Britain. It's important for citizens in all of those countries to ask their government, well, what are you doing about this? I actually, literally, just before I came into this meeting, I've been invited to speak at an event where a very senior pair of cabinet ministers from the Australian government are going to be attending, and they've asked me to do a provocative speech on UAPs. And I know both of the ministers, and I know their position on UAPs, and fair to say one of them is inquisitive. And it's going to be interesting because that would never have happened, say, a year ago or 2 years ago. There's a change happening, and I'm finding, for example, I'm getting a much better caliber of public official or scientist reaching out to me, wanting to engage. There's sort of they're kind of creeping out of the nest, basically just feeling their way, wanting to know what people like I think. And I don't pretend to know all, frankly. I think, probably I've got some things wrong over the years, but I'm doing the best job that I can do as a journalist. But the thing that really strikes me is I do sense a change, a quickening. And I think we're coming close to a tipping point where this issue is gathering momentum. And it's funny, because a lot of the time in the last 7 years that I've been looking at this, I've been struck, and I've made countless comments about it. I've been struck by the sluggishness and the failure to respond, the inertia in media, mainstream media. And it's kind of depressed me. And then I guess the Jake Barber story made me realize not only do we not need the Pentagon or the intelligence community or the private aerospace companies that are hiding this, we don't need to break that secret open. We can reveal it by doing what Skywatch is doing, which is doing its own summoning and its own retrieval, hopefully. And similarly with the media doesn't need some grey man in a suit sitting them down in an office giving them a briefing. They're never going to get that. It's never going to happen. They're never going to admit to the lies and the falsehoods, the deceit, the deliberate program of disinformation that's a complete breach of laws that forbid disinformation on the American public. But what is going to happen, I think, is it's going to happen despite the media. And the fascinating thing to me is we're at a time when mainstream media is effectively dying. It's dying on the vine, and good fucking riddance to it, frankly. I've worked in it for much of the last 35 years, and it's hopeless. It's failed to grasp this issue. It's failed to grasp the immensity of the biggest story in human history. And interestingly enough, Vinnie, it's people like yourself and myself who are operating online and in social media who are breaking this story bit by bit by bit. And that's doing exactly what the legacy media has done on other stories for the last 60, 70 years. But what really fascinates me is the chronic failures that are now coming out in the last few weeks even. I mean, I can remember as a journalist being approached about the Epstein story at 60 Minutes in Australia. And mercifully, in the end, we did do a story, but it took such a long time to persuade the mainstream editors in Australia that this was a reality, that there really were establishment pedophiles that were going around raping young girls and doing it with apparent impunity. And similarly with COVID, I can remember being contacted by epidemiologists in the Australian Therapeutic Goods Administration, our equivalent of the FDA, who told me that we should really be questioning the efficacy of the vaccines and the mRNA vaccines in particular, because there were contraindications that were not being properly explained to the public. And sure enough, the levels of cardiac morbidity and mortality have now come to light. The media failed to cover those stories, just like they did fail to cover the Hunter Biden laptop story. I mean, what a disgrace. It's true, and it wasn't some right-wing conspiracy trope. It's true that 50-something intelligence chiefs effectively deceived themselves by purporting that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. Now, I don't know whether they deceived themselves or whether they colluded in a deceit to try and stop Trump from becoming president. But what a disgrace to allow the politicization of intelligence. And there should have been a media investigation into the Hunter Biden laptop. There bloody well still should be. It was corrupt. I mean, I for the life of me do not know why there hasn't been a New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, Boston Globe mass investigation into the absolutely disgraceful allegations that are revealed in that laptop contents, which I happen to have here on my desk. And, some of what they show are disgusting. Why, in God's name, does the American public just roll over and tickle its tummy when an outgoing president pardons his son for what were clearly crimes? And why is it that the American media has allowed itself to be so partisan that it became so obsessed in the desire to annihilate Trump and to destroy his chances of winning the election that they lost their objectivity? And I think that's what's happened with this whole UAP issue, that the media is so used to being spoon-fed by the Pentagon. They've no longer got the resources to deploy investigative journalists. I mean, what I've done, I've spent a lot of my own money in the last 2 years talking to and chasing down Jake Barber and other sources, going and meeting people, often just to sit down and spend time with them. It costs money, it takes time. Newspapers, TV stations, they don't fund that kind of work anymore. It's old-fashioned plodding foot journalism. And it's sad, really, because there has never been an easier time to cover something up than right now. And that's why we are at a tipping point. We could very well find ourselves about to find out about the UAP mystery, but it could just as easily all be put back in a box. You could see a situation where the committee, albeit well-intentioned, the Transparency Committee, or what is it called, the Transparency Task Force, allow themselves to be misled unintentionally, and that the whole thing is buried yet again for another 20 or 30 years. That's certainly what the national security wants to happen and is hoping for. They don't want this scandalous secret art. I'm heartened that we've got people expressing all the right noises and all the good intentions in the right jobs, but I'm sceptical. So let's just wait and see what happens.
Agreed. Ross, we've got a few questions sent in, if you don't mind. If we just do a couple of those before I let you go. This one here from UAP Ryan says, Ross, you talked previously on Need to Know regarding disclosure, saying, yes, Bryce, there is a constraint on time. Is there a time constraint?
No. Look, I don't know. Simply, I don't know. I've heard 2027. I've heard 2034. I hear stories of catastrophes. I hear stories of arrivals. They're just stories. I mean, how do you corroborate things like that? I mean, that's the problem I have with, for example, things like abductions and mutilations. Unless I'm there to see it, how do you prove this stuff? So if somebody says to me, as has been said to me, that 2027 is going to be a big year, and then later on I hear 2034 is going to be a big year, frankly, I don't know. I mean, I really have no idea. But yeah, I mean, there are people who say that there are time limits. I certainly think this. I think the NHI, whatever it is prodding humanity's awareness of itself. And I think that the so-called drones are part of that. Not all of it, but part of that. I think that what's happening is there is a deliberate engagement by the NHI with certain people. They're trying to prod human consciousness. And I find it really interesting, the number of people I meet who have suddenly developed an interest in the phenomenon after they've had one or two weird, anomalous encounters. It's like what's happening is the NHI is showing itself to people. I mean, I think I've told this story before, but I had an Australian cabinet minister, very, very senior cabinet minister in a very senior portfolio, contacted me and told me about his incredible UAP sighting, which happened in a very public area. And he realised that even though he could see the craft hovering over what was a crowded public street, and he could see every detail of it, only he could see it. Whatever it was playing with his perception, telling him that it was there, letting him know that it was aware that he needed to know about it. And he explained this to me, and I thought he was mad. But the interesting thing is, the more I hear from people about that kind of twigging of consciousness, whilst there may not be a restraint on time, I think what's happening is the NHI are turning up the heat.
Wow. That's incredible. That's incredible.
Well, it may be incredible because it may be wrong, and I hasten to add it's just speculation on my part. But yeah.
But no, that story of the way he said that guy is the only one that could see it. We've heard that before. We've heard that kind of thing before in other cases. That's incredible. Here we go. This one's an anonymous person. Says, Ross, you kept the Jake Barber story quiet for 2 years. Does that mean you're working on something else and you're going to keep that quiet until it comes to fruition?
Absolutely. I am working on multiple stories right now. Watch this space.
Fantastic. That's it. Right, Ross, listen, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much. I really appreciate talking to you. And again, congratulations on the stellar work with everything you've been doing. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Vinnie. And thank you also to everyone out there who follows me and Vinnie. You have no idea how important it is to get your support and your response and even your criticism at times. It really matters to me, and I'm sure it matters to Vinnie as well.
It does indeed. Yeah. Thank you. Everyone has always been so supportive. And that's what keeps me going a lot of the time, because it is a lot of work, a lot of things happening, in my life. So everything's appreciated.
Well, I mean, it's funny. As a journalist, I've done so many stories on so many different things, but I've never had a response and an engagement from the public like I've had on this issue on UAPs. It's next level. And it's basically because whatever the mainstream media says, whatever the debunkers and the skeptics say, people can smell bullshit when they see it.
That they can indeed. On that note, everyone, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one. For now, take care. Goodbye.